Chapter 17, Active Propositions AN, thanks for your reviews. Chapter 16 by Lord Silvere. Are we then all agreed? Orion asked quietly, but forcefully, as he surveyed Cygnus Black, Romulus Malfoy, and Harry Ashworth across the table. The four were seated around a large banquet table located in a private dining room. The innkeeper, whose obscure Welsh pub had been selected by Orion for the meeting, had graciously allowed the small party to occupy his large dining room during the afternoon hours. Harry quickly nodded, though he felt incredibly nervous. They had been discussing how the Ministry, under the direction of Cygnus Black, could best cope with Voldemort and his followers. Harry did not feel qualified to be involved in such a discussion, but he had done his best to provide the wisest counsel he could. He of all people knew what was at stake. Orion accepted Harry's nod as if it had been expected. He then turned his attention to his brother. Cygnus, it sounds all right, Orion, the minister-elect said quietly. It's just that I don't feel prepared to shoulder this responsibility. Surely Professor Dumbledore is qualified. Perhaps I should step down and suggest that Dumbledore be installed as minister. Orion was already shaking his head. Professor Dumbledore has always shunned a direct involvement in politics. Furthermore, the movement against Tom needs to be moderate. You are in the best position to do what needs to be done. We have already talked about all of that. Harry suppressed a sigh. Perhaps Cygnus had not been the best choice for minister. Orion would have been far more competent, though he had not had a good chance to be elected. They had spent just as much time bolstering the self-esteem of Cygnus as they had spent on making plans to stop Voldemort. All right, let's do it, Cygnus said, sounding very confident, though Harry knew how unconfident he truly was. Orion smiled at his brother and then looked down the table at Romulus. The Malfoy patriarch was distractedly sipping on his fifth glass of fire whiskey. Romulus, are we agreed? There was no answer. Romulus looked toward the other three. Yes, it's what must be done, isn't it? Yes, it is, Orion said. Of course, Romulus muttered, again focusing his attention on his private thoughts. Good, Orion said. Cygnus, I'm sure you have important business to which you need to attend, so we'll disperse. Cygnus nodded and stood. I'll let you know how things stand with the department heads, Orion. If things are not well, I'll need your help, of course, Orion said. As soon as Cygnus had paraded away, Orion took Harry by the shoulder. We need to have a few words, Mr. Ashworth. He glanced at Romulus. But perhaps the hall outside this room would be best. I think Romulus needs some time alone. The two made their way out of the room and into the cramped hall that connected to the main taproom of the inn. Orion drew his wand and performed a number of spells to ensure their privacy. Now, Mr. Ashworth, as you will have noted earlier, we will likely need you to assume a position of minor authority in the ministry come summer. If Professor Slughorn makes a recovery prior to the beginning of the fall term at Hogwarts, that position may become somewhat long-term. Okay, said Harry. It will be hard for the ministry to employ you with forged Australian identity documents. What do you suggest I do? Then Harry asked. Hand over the forged documents to me, and I'll arrange for British versions to be officially forged for you, Orion said. How about I give you the necessary information, and I keep the forged documents? Harry asked. Orion smiled faintly. Clever. I suppose that will be all right, Ashworth. I'll send you an owl, then, Harry said. Was that all? No, Mr. Ashworth. I must know some things about you. Oh, do you have romantic feelings for Bellatrix? Orion asked. Harry smiled. I can't really say that I do, he said. Why not? Harry shrugged, trying to find a way to explain how he felt. His memories of the older, evil Bellatrix had predisposed him against romance with her, though time with the teenage Bellatrix had worn down his horror at the thought. Now, it was just that he didn't regard her as a potential romantic partner. His mind finally landed on a suitable reply. Well, she's a student, isn't she? Harry said. All I can say is that I haven't looked at Bellatrix from a romantic perspective. That should do it, Harry thought. What happens when she leaves Hogwarts? Orion asked. Harry shrugged. I don't know. Not only will she be fair game, Mr. Ashworth, but she will undoubtedly be following you around. You won't get rid of her easily, my young friend, Orion said. I suppose you're right, Harry said. I have a hard time seeing my future completely devoid of acquaintance with Bellatrix. It was true. As long as the dispute with Voldemort continued, he would be drawing on her for support, and vice versa. And then, theoretically, if the dispute were to end quickly, who would be around for Harry to hang around with? Bellatrix, maybe the patriarchs, but what would he talk about with them? Harry didn't know anyone else at Ur, or at least no one knew Harry very well. Maybe I ought to start expanding my circle of friends, Harry thought. I am sure that in the place from where you originate, wherever that may be, you are accustomed to a more modern view of certain social interactions, Ashworth, Orion said slowly. However, have you ever considered an arranged marriage? No, said Harry. Not really, it is old-fashioned, Orion admitted. However, think about it. You've already admitted that you see yourself and Bellatrix maintaining your acquaintance for quite some time. Bellatrix certainly seems to have attached herself to you. Thus, the distasteful part of an arranged marriage is eliminated. We could come to an agreement that gives you the opportunity to marry into the Black family and gain a legitimate surname and place in society. A marriage contract would be profitable. These things are true, said Harry very diplomatically, but I think it might be too early to make such an arrangement. She has more than a year of school left, Orion smiled. I'd be concerned if you had jumped too eagerly. Perhaps you are a better match for Bellatrix than I am able to know. We can talk of this some other time. Whatever you say, Harry said, displaying a relieved smile. As I said earlier back in your apartments, Mr. Ashworth, Orion continued, you are to be the authority at Hogwarts. If you tell Bellatrix to do or not do something, you should expect to be obeyed as if you were me. I don't need her doing something rash and getting herself killed. Aside from that, you know your role in this whole campaign against Voldemort. Try to sniff out other students the Dark Lord has recruited or may consider for recruitment. Either exploit them as best you can for our purposes or try to get them out of the mess. Some of them may not be past redemption, though the number may be fewer than we'd all prefer. Unconsciously, he glanced back toward the room where Romulus Malfoy was still drowning himself in spirits. Right, said Harry. I'll carry on and wait to hear from you. Good, said Orion, holding up his wand. Don't forget to email me your personal information. Also be sure to keep an eye on Dumbledore. If he figures out that Tom is on the loose, he'll undoubtedly begin his own campaign. It would be useful if we could coordinate our efforts without having a direct, official connection. He then disapparated, leaving Harry standing alone in the hall outside of the private dining room. Harry stood there, wondering which of his assignments was more important to Orion, babysitting potential Death Eater candidates or keeping Orion apprised of Dumbledore's actions. If Harry had learned one thing from Orion Black, it was that politics was a subtle art. Harry looked back toward the dining room. Romulus had been out of sorts since he had learned that his son was pretty much a confirmed Death Eater. Harry didn't know what to do. What was one supposed to say to such a parent? Sorry, about your son joining a terrorist organization. Let me know if I can be of help. That didn't seem very comforting. Feeling like he should at least not leave Romulus alone, Harry walked back into the room and sat down, grabbing a spare tumbler. Pour me one, he asked Romulus. Silently, Romulus picked up the bottle of fire whiskey provided by the innkeeper and poured Harry a glass, his hand trembling ever so slightly. Harry sat and sipped the fire whiskey, thinking about the Voldemort situation, and ironically, even his upcoming classes. Homework still had to be assigned and marked. After all, the fool, Romulus barked. Silly fool, sorry, Harry asked, even though he knew about whom Romulus was speaking. It was just that Harry didn't know how else to reply. What did he think a Dark Lord could give him? Glory and power, I imagine, Harry offered. No follower of a Dark Lord has power or glory, Romulus scowled. If that ghost of a professor could teach history, maybe more people would know that. I guess, Harry said, reflecting on his own experiences as a student of Professor Binns. It was true that the professor had never really taught about Dark Lords, or at least not about Dark Lords who weren't involved in goblin rebellions. Lucius will ruin the Malfoy name, Romulus whispered. He'll pour our money into the Dark Lord's frivolous pursuits, make my manor the Dark Lord's, and risk the lives of my family in the Dark Lord's war. How fortunate that you control the Malfoy fortune and assets, Harry said. It doesn't have to be unless you allow it, Romulus nodded. You speak truth, Harry. I am Lord Malfoy, and the House of Malfoy will not bend knee to the Dark Lord. Not while I am alive, anyway. Problem solved, said Harry, trying to sound cheerful, but not overly so. Eventually, Lucius may learn the error of his ways and stop following the Dark Lord. It may already be too late for that, Romulus sighed. Harry did not really want to say it aloud, but secretly, he agreed. Are you sure the map says she's alone in there? Sirius asked for the fourth time. Yes, James sighed. She's alone. It's just that it wasn't so long ago that your map was saying that we were sitting next to people in the loo when we were actually in the Great Hall, Sirius pointed out. Well, said James. If the map is previously known for saying that there are more people in a room than there actually are, maybe we should be worried she's not in there at all. Sirius rolled his eyes. Don't be silly, we followed her and watched her go in there. It's the only way in or out. That's not the point, Sirius, James said. Whatever, what does it matter whether she's alone in there? James asked. Is your father suspicious that she and Professor Ashworth are? No, Sirius said, focusing intently on the door to Professor Ashworth's private chambers. If it turns out he's in there with her, we can go and not be worried. That makes no sense, James complained. I'm not one to talk, but really, those two seem too close for a student and professor. It seems like your father should be worried about that sort of thing. No, this is serious, said Sirius. No, you're serious, Sirius, James punned. Oh, shut up, Sirius grumbled. Bellatrix is in danger, apparently. My dad said that I have to keep an eye on her when Professor Ashworth isn't. Wait, so Professor Ashworth is protecting your cousin? From what Sirius looked around before answering in a whisper. A Dark Lord, James gasped. No way, Sirius nodded. Apparently there's a new Dark Lord. Why is the Dark Lord after your cousin then? James inquired. Sirius shrugged. Apparently she and Professor Ashworth have been fighting this Dark Lord. Last night, she wandered off and a bunch of his followers nearly killed her. That's why she's been moved to Gryffindor Tower, and that's why I dragged you down here when I saw her leave her dorm. I knew that Ashworth guy seemed strange, James observed. Obviously, he's a spy planted by your father. I bet he doesn't even know anything about potions. Don't be ridiculous, Sirius scoffed. Just think about it, James argued. Things have been off for several months. Several months ago Professor Ashworth was appointed to the staff. Then he started having those dinners and being overly friendly with the students. Then, we saw him and Bellatrix wandering around at night on the map. Maybe, Sirius said, rubbing his chin. But wasn't it Malfoy who twisted people's arms to get Ashworth on the staff? Maybe your father and Malfoy are in this together, James theorized. So why, in Merlin's name, are the Black and Malfoy families combining against a Dark Lord? Sirius asked. We're supposed to support Dark Lords, pureblood politics and all that. Maybe this Dark Lord is from the wrong political faction, James suggested. Yeah, right, Sirius said. We should talk to Ashworth about this Dark Lord. Maybe he can get us in on the ground level fighting him, James said, sounding excited. Sirius looked at James with an arched eyebrow. Why do we want to get involved in a fight with a Dark Lord? Well, if we want to be auras, we could count it as experience, James said. You're mental. I bet you just want to impress Lily. There was some silence. I thought so, said Sirius. Isn't fighting Dark Lords a good thing? James asked. Depends on how likely you are to get killed, Sirius mused. They were interrupted from further musings by the sound of footsteps approaching from down the hall. Soon, Professor Ashworth came into sight. Let's get out of here, Sirius muttered. Looks like he's got her covered for now. However, James had other plans. Before Sirius could realize what was happening, James had approached Professor Ashworth. Good to see you, Professor, said James. Good to see you, replied Harry. How are you doing? Great, said James. I just want you to know that you can count on Sirius and me for any help that you need in the upcoming difficulties. We'll make sure Bellatrix is safe, too. Harry stared at James with confusion. Sorry, Sirius jumped in and saved his friend. Don't worry, Professor. We've got you covered. See you around. He grabbed James's arm and dragged him away. Harry stared at the retreating backs of his future father and godfather. What did they know? How much had Orion told Sirius and how much had Sirius told James? Probably everything he knew and a little more besides. Shaking his head, Harry continued to his chambers and opened the door, letting himself in. He paused after shutting the door behind him to scan the room. Bellatrix was lying on the couch, apparently asleep. Deciding that Bellatrix probably needed all the sleep she could get, Harry opted not to disturb her. How did the meeting go? She asked, surprising Harry. Apparently she was only lying on the couch with her eyes shut, or perhaps had been dozing only lightly. Well enough, said Harry. Orion and Cygnus seem to know what they are doing. They seem to have some good plans to start on once your father's becoming minister is official. What about us? Bellatrix asked. What are we going to be doing? Not too much, Harry admitted. At least, not so much until the term ends here. Mostly, we're going to keep an eye out for any further recruitment among the students' body. We'll also let your uncle know about Professor Dumbledore's activities. I guess that makes us spies. Bellatrix observed as she opened her eyes and sat up on the couch. What happens during the summer life will get more interesting, Harry said, at least for me. Orion has plans, and of course, I'll be free to pursue some of my own plans. I don't know what plans your family has for you. It doesn't matter what plans they have for me, Bellatrix retorted. I'm 17, that means I can make my own plans for the summer. Indeed, said Harry as he sat next to her on the couch. You can make your own plans, but should you? Bellatrix chose to ignore that comment. If you're not invited to move in with my family or my uncle's family, I am inclined to move in with you. Harry wasn't sure how much he liked that idea. It was true that Bellatrix spent a great deal of time in his personal living quarters, but becoming roommates sounded a little too intimate for him. Fortunately, though, Harry had a way to dodge the proposal. I don't really have a place for you or me to move into. I guess we'll have to hope that you get invited to live with us, Bellatrix said, though, it isn't all that hard to find a flat for the right price. There was a moment of silence before Bellatrix continued the conversation. Did my uncle speak to you about anything else? Harry's mind flashed back to the conversation about an arranged marriage. However, he wasn't about to bring that up with Bellatrix. The fight against Voldemort was pretty much it, really. That was all. He didn't ask about anything else. Bellatrix inquired. I don't know, said Harry. Do you know if your uncle has told your cousin Sirius very much about this fight? Bellatrix wasn't pleased with the change of topic, but she was also curious enough to find out why Harry would bring up Sirius. I think he told him enough about why he's supposed to be my bodyguard, she said, rolling her eyes. Yeah, well, he and James Potter were waiting for me outside the door there. They assured me that I had their support in the coming difficulties, Harry told Bellatrix. Oh great, Bellatrix grumbled. Uncle Orion probably told Sirius too much, not realizing that the twerp tells James Potter everything. Those other two creeps probably know everything, too. Interesting, said Harry. I think a memory charm is in order, Bellatrix said. How good are you at those? I don't think we need to memory charm anybody, said Harry, obscurely defending his father and his friends from Bellatrix's enthusiasm. Besides, they could be useful, maybe, Bellatrix grumbled. It's nearly time for dinner, Harry observed. Why don't you head down to the Great Hall? We can catch up later. Bellatrix strode into the Great Hall just as dinner was served. Out of habit, she made her way toward the Slytherin table before remembering that she was now residing with a Gryffindor house. Casually correcting herself, she made her way to the Gryffindor table and assumed a seat next to her cousin Sirius. Fancy meeting you here, Sirius said with a smirk on his face. Shut it or I'll hex you, Bellatrix growled. It wasn't so much her cousin's behavior that was irking her, it was the looks she was receiving from the students of Slytherin House. They were shocked that Bellatrix Black was sitting at the Gryffindor table. Even Bellatrix's sister Narcissa seemed surprised at the move. Apparently, Orion had not spoken to her. Bellatrix's other sister, Andromeda, was nowhere to be seen. Orion had probably not spoken to her either, though her reaction would have been the same either way. Andromeda had ceased from caring about Bellatrix and Narcissa's social life long ago. James Potter, seated on the other side of Sirius, leaned forward and got Bellatrix's attention. We're ready to help you and Professor Ashworth, he said. Pray tell, Bellatrix said snidely. What did you have in mind? I was hoping you'd tell us, James said, trying to maintain his dignity. Practice up on your killing curse, Bellatrix said sarcastically. Next time Ashworth and I go out, we'll take you along. We might bag a few dark followers. You don't need to be so snippy about it, Sirius said. James is only trying to be helpful, right, James? Yeah, helpful, James confirmed. Bellatrix rolled her eyes. Well, I'll let you know when I need help. Actually, James said pompously, your uncle already told Sirius that you need your back watched. We'll do that gladly. We're also interested in helping you and Professor Ashworth together. Great, said Bellatrix. I'll let you know when both I and Ashworth need help. Happy I guess, said James. It's just that your Bellatrix held up her hand. Be quiet, I want to eat. Silence reigned between the three for the duration of the meal, though Bellatrix's ire continually grew. It wasn't directed at James or Sirius, however. The whisperings of the Slytherins as they looked and pointed out Bellatrix made her angry. A twisted sort of paranoia overcame Bellatrix, and by the time the meal had nearly ended, she had concluded that they were all followers of the Dark Lord in training. Bellatrix spoke up just as James and Sirius got up to leave. I've decided that Ashworth and I need your help. Sirius sniggered at Bellatrix's sudden change of mind, but James reacted eagerly. Really, what can we do? We're going to spy on the Slytherins and find out which ones are involved in a bad business, then we'll make their lives miserable. Sirius, though hesitant at first to get involved, thought this sounded slightly fun. Can we tell Remus and Peter? I'm sure they'll want to help. Yeah, sure, whatever, Bellatrix said. Meet me in the Gryffindor common room just after curfew. We'll draw up some plans. I want for every witch and wizard in Britain to know that it is my goal to ensure stability in our society and government, proclaimed Cygnus Black as his echoing voice was magically amplified and carried through the halls of the Ministry of Magic. As your Minister for Magic, I will fight to preserve what is ours from those who might usurp our rights. Alastor Moody scowled as he stalked through the halls of the ministry toward the main officers of magical law enforcement. It wasn't necessarily the politically motivated drivel Minister Black was spouting in his inaugural speech that annoyed Moody, it was that everyone seemed so pleased by what they were hearing. Both purebloods and Mugglepawns alike seemed happy with Minister Black's goals. What is stability and who might usurp our rights, he wondered. It won't be easy, reverberated Minister Black's voice, but I know that with the help of each employee of the ministry we can maintain our goals. Thank you. Applause followed, though not amplified. Moody could hear it coming from the main ministry atrium in which Minister Black had delivered his speech. Director Fox's secretary was not at her desk. Moody had seen her in the atrium, though Andrew Fox himself had been conspicuously absent. For that reason, Moody had come to his office to see if the Director of Magical Law Enforcement had any inside information to share. Moody opened the door and stalked into Director Fox's office, stopping almost immediately to stare at the disorganized condition of the office. It was strewn with half-filled boxes and rubbish bins. It appeared that Director Fox was moving out. The man himself stood next to his window, looking down into the atrium at the crowd surrounding Minister Black. Andrew, Moody asked. Fox turned and smiled at Moody. You've caught me. What is going on? Have you been fired? Moody demanded, wondering whether perhaps Minister Black had already chosen to take a dramatic change of course in policy. No, admitted Andrew. I guess you could call it being voluntarily reassigned. Why does Minister Black want you gone? Moody asked suspiciously. Andrew rummaged around in his desk and pulled out a bottle of butterbeer. Want one? No, but thanks, Moody said, waving his hand as he watched Director Fox open the bottle and take a swig before sitting down. Moody himself shifted some of Fox's possessions to create space on a chair before also taking a seat. What is Minister Black's motivation? Andrew didn't look at Moody for several moments, but under the aura's intense gaze, he finally broke. Minister Black had a meeting with all of the department heads this morning, he admitted slowly. He didn't say it outright, but it would appear that things are about to become rough for magical law enforcement. I didn't sign up for such a grueling job, as it were. I explained to Minister Black that I didn't think I could continue in my present position. He kindly offered to make me ambassador to the United States Department of Magic. What do you mean? Moody asked, feeling vague stirrings of nervousness. I mean, that I chickened out, Andrew said with a self-deprecating smile. I'm not prepared to lead our department through a war. Moody's eyes widened as he physically betrayed the surprise he was feeling. A war? But Minister Black just declared that his goal was to maintain stability. Andrew Fox laughed merrily. But that is his goal, or rather, it is Orion Black's goal. Orion is a long-term planner, for one reason or another, Orion fears for the future of our world. He has orchestrated his brother's rise to power as his first step in safeguarding us from the threat he sees. I don't know what the threat is, but I do know that within the hour, Minister Black will be signing executive orders to increase the size of the Aura Corps and to divert much of the ministry budget to defense funding. But why? Moody demanded. What is the motivation? Andrew Fox shrugged. I don't know, and I can't say I care. I'll be in America shortly. Now, he said as he stood up, you'll have to excuse me. Davian Pruitt will be here shortly to take the reins of the department. Moody also stood. He shook Director Fox's hand. We'll miss you, Moody said. Thanks, Andrew said. There are two last things I have for you. He held up a thick envelope for a promotion and information about Harry Ashworth. Excited as Moody was about the promotion, he was curious about why Director Fox would give him information on Ashworth. What about Ashworth? Minister Black signed certain documents this morning. He has essentially granted Harry Ashworth a British identity. He tried to be sneaky about it, but you can't get that sort of thing past me. It would appear that Ashworth is closely connected to the Black family after all. You're a spy, as it were. I don't know what he has been assigned to do, however, there's not much at Hogwarts other than your friend Professor Dumbledore, and I don't think he's involved in any way, for or against, the Blacks. Thank you, Moody said as he took the envelope, feeling slightly bemused. Don't mention it to you literally, Andrew Fox said. Davian Pruitt, how extraordinary, Dumbledore commented, leaning back and popping a lemon drop in his mouth. I did not expect him to be appointed to such a position. On the other hand, though, I did not really expect Andrew Fox to be removed from the DMLE. I can't fault Minister Black for appointing Director Pruitt, Moody admitted reluctantly. Pruitt is bold, and it is clear that his interests are for the common good. Other than the fact that he's never been employed by the DMLE, he is the perfect candidate. You're almost too perfect, at least, too perfect to be appointed by a Black. I would have expected Romulus Malfoy or Vincent McNair, perhaps even Barty Crouch. Merlin knows he's wanted in for ages. Dumbledore sucked on his lemon drop thoughtfully. Perhaps this threat Orion allegedly sees is serious enough that the Blacks are putting aside some of their normal family politics. On the other hand, it may be that the Blacks and Malfoys are not in cahoots after all. Why do you say that? Moody asked, casually waving off Dumbledore's offer of the lemon drop bowl. There was an incident over the weekend, Dumbledore explained. Young Mr. Malfoy and the brothers Lestrange, among others, attempted to harm Bellatrix Black in the Forbidden Forest. I only learned of the incident after young Bellatrix sought aid from Professor Ashworth, who in turn notified Orion Black. By the time Orion arrived in my office, the culprits in question had fled from Hogwarts. Orion probably isn't very appreciative of Romulus's son trying to hurt his niece. Moody narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Ashworth, again indeed, Dumbledore acknowledged. It is very clear now that Ashworth is functioning with and on behalf of the Black Patriarchs. If he's an agent of the Blacks, why was it that Malfoy was the one to twist your arm to hire Ashworth to substitute for Sloane? An interesting question, Dumbledore said. I don't know the answer. Moody nodded thoughtfully. As it happens, Andrew Fox mentioned Harry Ashworth today. Oh, Moody withdrew several sheets of parchment from a pocket inside of his robes and held them out for Dumbledore. Early this morning, Minister Black took the liberty to issue Mr. Ashworth identity documents. You're the sort of identity documents Mr. Ashworth should already possess. Dumbledore accepted the papers and examined them. How very curious, he said slowly. Sketchy is what it is, Moody grumbled. And yet we have no evidence that Harry Ashworth has committed or plans to commit serious crimes, lust or, Dumbledore said. My observations led me to believe that he is a very reasonable young man. You're too trusting, Albus, Moody accused. That's my choice, Dumbledore retorted. Moody watched quietly as Dumbledore finished looking over the notes Andrew Fox had provided concerning Harry Ashworth. Upon completing this task, Dumbledore leaned back and closed his eyes. Accustomed to seeing Dumbledore think like this in moments of decision, Moody continued to wait. Finally Dumbledore opened his eyes and leaned forward, looking at Alastor over the eyes of his half-moon spectacles. The rising rate of crime, the incident at Hogwarts this past weekend, and the dramatic change in the Ministry led me to believe that something very serious is happening behind the scenes. I think we need to start seeking out like-minded individuals. Perhaps as our numbers grow, we will be able to come to a greater understanding of what is happening and then do something about it. I know a few people, Moody volunteered. Good, said Dumbledore. See if you can talk to them discreetly. I don't necessarily believe that Minister Black is on the side of wrong, but I think it would be best if we operated independently from him. You're at least for now. What about Ashworth? Moody asked. Leave Ashworth to me, Dumbledore directed. Bellatrix stalked into the room of requirement and found Harry waiting for her in front of the fireplace. Upon hearing the door open and close, he turned around and faced her. On his face, he wore a very smug grin. You lied to me, Bellatrix groused. Did I? Harry asked curiously. I wanted to know if my uncle had talked to you about anything else this past weekend, Bellatrix reminded him. Oh, you tried to pretend that he did not while in fact, he did, Bellatrix continued. I guess he may have brought some other subjects up, Harry admitted, like a marriage contract, for instance. Bellatrix said tartly. He may have, he did. Oh, I think I remember, now, said Harry. Oh, good, yeah, he pointed out that it could be profitable and said that it was a good idea, Harry said, coming clean. Why didn't you accept it? Why should I have done so? We agreed to be partners, Bellatrix said, her voice rising and becoming almost shrill. Harry looked confused. Yes, We are partners, but what does marriage have to do with that arrangement you should have accepted immediately? Bellatrix insisted. Isn't there supposed to be some sort of romantic element involved in a marriage? Harry asked. Most people get married because they love each other. Bellatrix threw up her hands in disgust. That sort of marriage is for muggles and muggle lovers. In this society, a marriage is an opportunity for a partnership. It would have been perfect for us. That's not how I view marriage, Harry argued stubbornly. I think it should be romantically motivated. Well, you're a fool, Bellatrix cried, her voice breaking. Look, Bellatrix, we're still partners, said Harry. We're working together, and we're making progress. Yeah, well, it seems like I'm the one who does all the work. I'm the one who snooped around so that we could go to that meeting with the Dark Lord, and I'm the one who got mauled in the forest by those recruits. The least you could have done was accept a marriage contract. Harry sighed. I'm sorry, Bellatrix, but I just don't see it that way. Bellatrix snarled and lashed out with her fist. However, instead of her fist coming into contact with and breaking Harry's nose, it passed completely through Harry's face. It was as if Harry was a ghost, albeit a colorful one. She gasped. What's going on? Harry grinned. I finally figured out how to do that spell. I'm actually standing elsewhere in the room. Bellatrix spun around and scanned the room, but she could see Harry nowhere. She turned back to the illusion of Harry. Where are you? The Harry illusion faded away. Right here, Harry said, directly behind her. Bellatrix spun and lashed out with her fist. Harry had been anticipating this move on her part and blocked it. It's hands-only drill night, Bellatrix reminded him. I intend to whip you soundly. She then went to kick him in the groin, but he dodged, grabbed her arm and threw her to the ground with her in momentum. Not even stopping to feel the pain or embarrassment, Bellatrix kicked out her feet and tripped Harry, who promptly fell down. He rolled and attempted to grab her feet before she could get up, but he was too slow. The fight continued very awkwardly as they attempted to punch, kick, or trip each other. Neither of them had participated in professional training for such fighting. To make the fight even worse, Harry's heart wasn't in the fight because he was too afraid of hurting Bellatrix. Her injuries from being chased through the forest were on his mind. He didn't want to re-injure her ribs. Thus, it was only a matter of time before a kick to the stomach left Harry flat on his back, gasping for breath. Bellatrix jumped on top of him and put her face to his. Harry stared into her violet eyes which still were betraying her anger and disappointment over his rejection of the marriage contract. She then pushed her face against his and kissed him almost violently. The kiss lasted for quite a while, despite Harry's lack of active participation. Finally, she ended it and stood up. We can have all the romance you want, if you feel it's all that important in a marriage, she said. Next time my uncle brings up the subject of a marriage contract, you'd better start negotiating the details immediately. She then stalked out of the room, leaving Harry on the floor. Harry remained motionless on the floor until a room of requirement had the mercy to cause a drink to appear next to him on the floor.